Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is speaking about PM CARES Fund. What is this PM CARES Fund has been explained on 23rd of June 2020 under the second topic transparency during a crisis at 12 minutes 12 seconds. Kindly look into it. Our focus today would only be on the judgment given by the Supreme Court of India. What is the context? There is an NGO called as the Center for Public Interest Litigation. This Center for Public Interest Litigation as an NGO had filed one of the cases in the Supreme Court of India. What was the case all about? When you look into the structure of the PM CARES, it does not have transparency, says this NGO. Why? Because most of the government institutions are being audited by the Comptroller and the Auditor General. But when it comes to this particular PM CARES fund, this is not audited by the CAG. As a result, one of the major questions asked by the Center for Public Interest Litigation was whether this particular PM CARES fund has to be audited by the CAG. The second important question is, since this is not audited by the CAG, there is no transparency and accountability. We do not know who is funding this particular fund and where the funds are being diverted to. What is the funds utilized for? In spite of it being called that it is for COVID-19, where is it being funded? Where is it being spent? Is another question that this particular interest litigation had asked the Supreme Court. So what it had also requested, since it is not having transparency and accountability, this PM CARES fund has to be transferred to the National Disaster Fund. So all the money, the funds that is present in the PM CARES fund has to be transferred to the National Disaster Response Fund was another question or an argument put forward by this NGO. So the Supreme Court looked into all these arguments and ultimately has come out with this particular judgment. So what does this judgment say? The judgment clearly goes on to say that this need not be audited by the CAG. Why it need not be audited by the CAG? That is because this institution, that is the PM CARES fund, is established as a public charitable trust. So because it is established as a public charitable trust and it is not getting any funding from the government, it is not through the budgetary support, this need not be audited by the CAG, says the Supreme Court. So ideally what this should have been done is by the CAG, says the CPIL, but according to the Supreme Court, since it is not getting any budgetary support or money from the government of India, that is the primary reason CAG need not audit this PM CARES fund. Instead, a private agency can audit as established by this public charitable trust is the first answer given to the first question. The second question is about PM CARES fund. Should it be transferred to the National Disaster Response Fund? The answer to this is no, once again by the Supreme Court. Why? Because the National Disaster Response Fund is established by the Disaster Management Act of 2005. This is a statutory fund as established under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. But what was the arguments put forward by the NGO? It said since it is a statutory body, since it can be audited by the CAG, why not push these funds into the NDRF? So the answer given by it, no, because these two are different entities. We already have the existence of the National Disaster Response Fund. In case people want to fund the National Disaster Response Fund, no one is obstructing them. PM CARES is already a voluntary one. No one is enforcing them. Similarly, in case people want to fund the National Disaster Response Fund, they will do it, is what the Supreme Court has said. So the Supreme Court is clear and has given no's to both the question put forward by this Center for Public Interest Litigation. Another important question was also asked by the Center for Public Interest Litigation. What was this question? They asked a simple question. We do not have a policy for the pandemic. The COVID-19 struck all of a sudden, so we do not have any policy whatsoever. We have the Disaster Management Act, which is currently being employed by the central government. Then we have the Epidemic Disease Act, which is also employed by most of the states to fight the menace of COVID-19. So should we institute a new policy was another question asked to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has clearly given a no to it. Why? Because there is already what is called as the minimum standards of relief. The minimum standards of relief is already present under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. This will basically provide the shelter, the food, the drinking water, medical cover, sanitation, and many other things that is already present under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. So what is the need of coming up with a new policy while we already have an existing policy which is catering to the basic needs, says the Supreme Court. So Justice Bhushan also found that there was no reason to interfere with the minimum standards of relief the government should be providing during the pandemic. Why? Because there is already an existence of the Disaster Management Act of 2005. That is the primary reason they need not have to come up with a new policy in this particular scenario. Why? Because the policy will require a lot of discussion and deliberation. Currently, the parliament is not in session, it is not active. So in case they have to come up, this will require due deliberations and discussions. But as of now, since we are in a particular pandemic situation, the minimum standards of relief is not required to be changed for the pandemic, says the Supreme Court in this particular judgment. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says resurrecting the right to know. The central government had appointed the high level committee. This was to look into the implementation of clause 6 of the Assam Accord. What was the composition of this high level committee? This included the retired judge of the Guwahati High Court. This also included the advocate generals of two northeast states, and it also included 3 members from the All Assam Students Union. What is this clause 6 of the Assam Accord? It envisaged that appropriate constitutional, legislative, administrative safeguards shall be provided to protect, preserve and promote the cultural, social, linguistic identity and heritage of the Assamese people. So this is on a comprehensive basis, making sure that the identity of the Assamese people is protected. So what is this legislative and administrative safeguards? Basically, when we speak about safeguards, this includes, let's say, the reservation of the electoral seats or the employment opportunities, which is highly safeguarded and it is reserved for the people of Assam, and some of the political rights which is exclusively guaranteed to the people of Assam. Then we also have some of the historical places and heritage sites in the region of Assam. This has to be preserved and also have to be protected by the government of Assam in the cultural aspect. Then we also have the protection of Assamese and other indigenous language, which becomes the basis of the linguistic identity. So there must be some measures taken by the central government, taken by the state government. Why? Because they have to conserve and also provide all the money support, financial support for research of the languages, culture and public life of the people of Assam. And at the same time, the land safeguards should also include the rights over the natural resources. So these are some of the aspects when it comes to clause 6 of the Assam Accord. What is the present context? This high level committee had submitted this report, which was speaking about clause 6 of the Assam Accord to the Chief Minister of Assam. The Chief Minister of Assam did also give this report to the central government as well. So ideally, the central government should have looked into it and also implemented this clause 6 of the Assam Accord and the recommendations given by the high level committee. But what is happening of late? The central government should have ideally implemented this high level committee's report, or it should have at least notified the people or the general public what is happening with respect to this high level committee. But it has kept completely silent. It is quiet about it. So as a result, what the AASU has done, because the government has remained quiet on its content and about its implementation, the AASU has decided to make public this high level committee. So what was supposed to be confidential, what was supposed to be assumed to be secret, is now made public by the AASU in Assam. So the people in the region of Assam are now able to know what is the recommendation given by the high level committee with respect to the clause 6 of the Assam Accord. So this is now there in the general public, and they would be able to know what are the major significant factors when it comes to the the clause 6 of the Assam Accord. In this particular backdrop, we as the citizens of the country should have the right to know. So what is this right to know is what this article all about. We are living in a democracy. Secrecy in democracy is antithetical to the very idea of democratic society. Why? Because right to know promotes decentralization. When we know what is happening with the government, we are becoming part of the government. How? Through the participation, and this is the very idea of participatory democracy. The people's right to know, therefore, is a healthy condition that which is established between the people and the democratic state. So there is political interaction that is happening between the people of India as well as the state represented by the political representatives. Now let's look at some of the judicial pronouncements to understand the importance of right to know. There was one of the landmark judgments called as the State of Uttar Pradesh versus Rajnarayan. According to this judgment, right to know is basically derived from the concept of freedom of speech under Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. In democracy, we the people elect the representatives. They become the public agents. They also come up with some of the public acts as well. So when they are executing this through the public functionaries, they should not have any type of secrets. Why? Because it is us who have elected them. They have come up with an act and they are implementing this act as public functionaries. So we have elected them. So while executing this particular act, there should be no secrecy when it comes to its execution. So this judgment further goes on to say, being the public agents, they are supposed to be open to the people of the country, and only such things can be kept as secrets which could be a problem to the public security, or it can threaten the national interest, or it is going to hamper the issues with another foreign country. In rest of the cases, there should be transparency and there should be no secrets, says the State of Uttar Pradesh versus Rajnarayan. Further, according to this judgment laid in S.P. Gupta versus the President of India in the year 1981, Justice Venkatachalaya made a beautiful statement. He says when it comes to most of the liberal democracies of late, what you actually see is liberalization with respect to the restrictions imposed on the people. What do we mean by it? There are major restrictions that are already imposed on the people. People would not be able to access the documents. They would not be able to know whereabouts of the government. They would not be able to know what is the government doing. So this is the restriction that is imposed on the people by the government. But of late, with liberal democracies opening up, this restriction has slowly been removed, and now people, in the name of transparency and accountability, are able to know what is happening with respect to the government because they have the right to know. Justice Venkatachalaya further goes on to emphasize, of late there is right of a citizen to know rather than the need to know, according to Justice Venkatachalaya. Then we have another important landmark judgment, and that is Yashwant Sinha versus the Central Bureau of Investigation 2019. Before we understand this judgment, we have to focus on New York Times Co. versus the United States. What is this judgment all about? This was given by the Supreme Court of United States of America. What exactly happens? There are two newspapers. One is the New York Times, the other is the Washington Post. Both are newspapers which wanted to publish the then classified Pentagon Papers. So these were something of confidential in nature, which was not supposed to be published, according to President Richard Nixon, who was heading the executive authority. He was asking them to suspend the publication. He was requesting them not to publish it, and hence a case was filed in the Supreme Court of United States of America whether this Pentagon Papers, which he feels is a secret, should not be in the public, was discussed in the Supreme Court. Should it be published by the New York Times or it should not be published according to the president? That was the case that was filed in the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court looked into it and it gave the permission to New York Times as well as Washington Post to publish the then classified Pentagon Papers without any risk of government censorship or punishment by the government of United States of America. Now linking this to the Indian context, where This judgment, when it was delivered, also looked into this landmark judgment of New York Times versus the United States. What is this judgment with reference to India? When it comes to India, the Hindu newspaper wanted to publish one of its report with reference to the Rafael judge. The Rafael judge, according to the government of India, was assumed to be some secrets. So it did not want the Hindu newspaper to publish these secrets about the Rafael judge. This was what went to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court looked into this case where the central government said there are some secrets with respect to the Rafael judge which should not be published by the Hindu newspaper. But the Hindu newspaper, claiming its fundamental right under Article 19 about right to press, also said that it has every right to publish it. So the Supreme Court looks into it, dismissed the government's plea to declare the Rafael judge purchase a secret, instead allowed the Hindu to publish the series of articles about Rafael where it upheld the freedom of free speech and right under Article 19. So these two cases have a similar resemblance where the government did not want the newspapers to publish, but when it heads to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court gives them the permission to publish these important articles. Is what is the right to know. What is the right to know here? That people should be aware of what is happening within the government. Subsequently, when it comes to India, the courts also held that RTI Act supersedes the Official Secrets Act. Now, linking this to the high level committee, what we have to understand is that in the past there have been n number of examples, and it has been proved in the court of law that whenever there is secrets, that which is not hampering the national security or interfering with the foreign relations, this can be in the general forum. So what it has said is that Official Secrets Act is not attracted to the disclosure of this high level committee. So what the AASU has done is something in the public interest. Why? Because the people should know what is going to change in the near future with respect to their personal lives as mandated under the clause 6 of the Assam Accord. So nothing is wrong as done by the AASU is what the author says according to this article. So going forward, this should encourage governments to effectuate the citizens' right to know and know more when it comes to transparency in public interest, says the author. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about India and Nepal relationship. For the past 3 to 4 months, we have been discussing about India and Nepal's relationship. We have also spoken how there is a thaw in the relationship. We have understood what are the various political issues, the map issues and the border issues along Limpudara and multiple other issues surfacing between India and Nepal. All this has been explained on 23rd May 2020 and 29th May 2020. The link for the same will also be provided in our description box. But what is the focus of today's article? The article here speaks about what should be happening in the near future and how this frozen relationship has to be broken and has to be substituted by a willingness to take forward the relationship. India and Nepal have a cultural relationship. We also have the economic relationship. This economic and cultural relationship, which is broken currently, has to be revamped, is the first thing. So how does it happen? According to the recent updates, Prime Minister Oli recently called up Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. He congratulated India on the occasion of India's 74th Independence Day. And at the same time, he also conveyed to Prime Minister Modi his congratulations for India's recent election as a non-permanent member of United Nations Security Council. Modi also offered India's support to Nepal during the pandemic period, and it said that we would hold you hand to hand when it comes to any issues going forward. So the first breaking the ice part has already been initiated by Prime Minister Modi as well as Prime Minister Oli. What we had till now was a frozen relationship, but a start has been made by the Prime Ministers of both the country. So what we need to do is engage in more talks, is what this article all about. The author goes on to say that talks must be held regularly. We have already established the video conferencing facility. This will have to be enhanced where the foreign secretaries from both the countries will have to embrace face each other and we'll have to continue talks so that this relationship goes back to the historical high. And at the same time, one difficulty that we currently have is with respect to the back channel diplomacy. India and Nepal back in the year 2015 also had a similar situation. So what they were able to do was to establish what is called as the back channel diplomacy to revamp their relationship between each other. So what is this back channel diplomacy? Let's say there is a particular period where there are no talks between the country. There are no talks happening between the country. They are not negotiating. They are not bringing about new ideas and issues with respect to each other. That is when negotiations will have to start secretly and not in the public scrutiny. Whenever there is a public scrutiny, what happens? There can be an enemy who can influence the thought of Nepal. But in the present scenario, what we require is the back channel diplomacy, which means we have to conduct these operations in secrecy, sometimes even on the front channel as well. So all these talks that are happening at the secret level is what is called as the back channel negotiations. This back channel diplomacy usually takes place to break the diplomatic impasse or to de-escalate an international crisis. So what is the crisis? One is with respect to the political boundaries. The other is with respect to the words spoken by the Prime Minister of Nepal. So the Prime Minister of Nepal had spoken about India in a very bad way. He said that the virus of India is more dangerous than the coronavirus. Such were the words spoken by Oli as the Prime Minister of Nepal. So we have this de-escalation issue that we have to take forward. How? By establishing the back channel diplomacy. How are we going to de-escalate the international crisis? That is by putting a verbal restraint on the part of Prime Minister Oli. So he should know how to communicate with India by restricting his words with respect to India. He had previously compared India to virus, so on and so forth. This will obviously haunt India. So he should be in a restriction mode when it comes to his communication. And at the same time, India should also continue talks even during the pandemic times. India has currently said as long as the pandemic continues, let's not have talks with respect to all the political issues as well as the border issue. So the author suggests, in spite of the pandemic, India should continue to talk, says the author. India is also required to maintain status quo in the disputed areas. We have the number of disputed areas right now and the political changes that is happening in the constitution of Nepal and redrawing of the map as well. So all these issues will require restraint from India, and at the same time they have to maintain a status quo being a larger power. All this can be concluded after both the countries have talks with each other, and at the same time with the Prime Minister setting the tone for the conversation. The negotiating teams in the near future will have to bring all the past archival papers, treaties and agreements, administrative records, communications and maps regarding all these boundaries issue. They have to exchange with each other and ultimately in a peaceful manner have to conclude this political crisis, says the author. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about bringing changes to the criminal justice system. The background to this has been explained on 11th of July 2020 under the third topic, reform with caution. In the description box we would also be provide you the link, so kindly watch this and come back to this discussion. What is this article all about? We have the criminal justice system. When you look at the foundation of this criminal justice system, we have three important laws. One is the IPC, then what we have is the CRPC, and ultimately we have the Evidence Act. These become the foundation for the justice delivery system in India. What the government intends to is to bring changes in all these three laws. Why? Because this has a colonial hangover. This has a colonial imprint. There are number of laws which cannot be put up or it can be acted in the present scenario in the year 2020. So what the government intends is to bring all the changes introduced into these major laws. To bring this into implementation, they have constituted one of the committees for reforming this criminal law which has a colonial hangover. The committee aims to recommend an overhaul of the Indian criminal justice system. But this particular committee has certain issues. What does it? that is about its constitution, that is about its terms of reference, that is about composition. Let's try and understand what are the various concerns with respect to this particular committee. Why is this important? That is because it is speaking about the Indian criminal justice system and the revamp to this particular foundational law. When it comes to this particular committee, most of the committee reports will be accessed on the internet. So what are they asking? In case you want to bring changes, in case you want to make recommendations, in case you have to say something to the committee, what you have to post is your views on the internet. But how many people in India have the internet? Let's say I am a person who's remote, living in a remote corners, so I do not know what is going to happen with this particular committee. Even if I know it, if I want to recommend, I do not have access to the internet. So how will I give the recommendation or my viewpoint or my perspective to this committee is the first major issue. Why? Because 40% of the population actively uses the internet. The rest do not have the internet. Women are also less likely to have internet access, and in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, they are still not provided with internet. So all this means, how will I put out my perspective when they are asking recommendations on the platform of internet is the first major concern. The next major concern is usage in English. All these recommendations or their perspectives or their overview or their issues will be out in English. Is it provided in the southern Indian languages? Is it provided in other regional languages? That is currently not present. Only 10% of the Indian population speak English, and only those who are based in urban areas have idea about English. Since the criminal justice system is going to impact every single person in India, how can this be consolidated and viewpoints segregated only in English is the second major concern. The third major concern is about the committee's mandate. Why was it appointed during the times of the COVID-19, when all of us are stuck with COVID-19, when number of people are stuck how to come out of this COVID-19, and it has been given a very short duration of time to come out with recommendations. So why have this opaque nature is the first issue. Another issue is when it comes to the Law Commission of India. When it comes to the drafting of all these important laws, it is the Law Commission of India which usually looks into it. They also come up with recommendation which is usually accepted by the government of India. Why appoint a new committee while we already had the existence of the Law Commission of India is the third major concern. Then we have the oppressed communities. The oppressed communities include the Dalit community or the Adivasi community or the religious minorities. These are the people who are facing the brunt of the criminal justice system in India. When you look at the under trials or the people who are languishing in jails in India, most of the people are from this particular community. So how many people are included in this particular committee which is looking into the IPC, CRPC and Evidence Act reformation? So what we also have to consider is women, the transgender people, the sexual minorities who also face the gender based violence. So are they included in this committee is another major concern. In case the government is bringing such a major transformation, all these considerations will have to be included is what this article all about. But with respect to the background, kindly look into our 11th July 2020's third topic for the entire discussion. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. Consider the following statements. The election commissioner holds office for a term of 5 years or until he or she attains the age of 65 years. The election commissioner may at any time, by writing under his hand address to the chief election commissioner, resign his office. Which of the above statements are incorrect? It is asking for the incorrect statement, so the answer to this is both. Why? Because the election commissioner holds office for a term of about 6 years, and the election commissioner writes his resignation letter not to the chief election commissioner but to the president of India. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Ashok Lavasa quits election commission and is all set to join ADB. The chief election commissioner or an election commissioner may at any time, by writing under his hand address to the president, resign his office. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to appointment of judges to the High Court, which of the following statements are correct? He should have been an advocate of a High Court or High Court in succession for 10 years. He should be a distinguished jurist according to the President. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is one only. Why? This particular provision of jurist is only for the Supreme Court judges, and this is not there for the judges of the High Court. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So a person to be appointed as a judge of a High Court should have the following qualifications. He should be a citizen of India. He should have held a judicial office in territory of India for 10 years. He should have been an advocate of a High Court or High Courts for 10 years. The Constitution makes no provision for appointment of a distinguished jurist as a judge of the High Court. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements with respect to Digital Quality of Life Index. The index is prepared by US Chamber of Commerce Global Innovation Policy Center. India ranks ahead of Netherlands and China on e-government indicator. Which of the above statements are incorrect? It is asking for the incorrect statement, so the answer to this is one only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So this index is prepared by Surfshock, which happens to be a virtual private network provider based in Virgin Islands. It is a global index on digital quality of life in about 85 countries. It ranks countries on the basis of internet affordability and quality, electronic infrastructure, security and government. All the parameters that are weighed have equal weightage. So the first option is wrong. Why? Because it is not the US Chamber of Commerce, and the second option is right. So what is this e-government indicator? It is by checking the state government's online presence, readiness to employ artificial intelligence technology, and also minimize bureaucracy, reduce corruption and increase transparency of the public sector. And India is comparatively on the higher side than Netherlands as well as China. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following states are correctly matched? State of Otranto connects the Adriatic Sea with Ionian Sea. State of Messina, state between eastern tip of Sicily and the western tip of Calabria in the south of Italy. And state of Bonifacio, which is a state between Corsica in Italy and Sardinia in France. Which of them are correctly matched? The answer to this is 1 and 2 only. Why? That is because Corsica is not in Italy, but instead it is in France, and Sardinia is not in France, but it is in Italy. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, the state of Otranto connects the Adriatic Sea and Ionian Sea. The state of Messina is in this particular point, and the state of Bonifacio is present in this part, which is a state between Corsica of France and Sardinia of Italy. What is this whole issue all about? Turkey and Greece, which happens to be the members of the NATO, are at loggerheads. Why? Because both of them are claiming for energy in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. So both Turkey and Greece have overlapping maritime claims, and as a result there are tussles between Turkey as well as Greece. We will take forward this article in the near future because we are expecting certain updates with respect to this issue. Now let's look into the next practice question. Why does the government of India promote the use of neem coated urea in agriculture? That is because neem coating slows down the rate of dissolution of urea in the soil. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Right to know can be curtailed only in limited circumstances and if there is an overriding public interest. Substantiate with relevant case laws. Next question. The temporary freeze in India-Nepal relationship should be substituted by the willingness to establish multi-level contacts discussed. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Please review, come up with constructive criticism and also help your pals as well. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.